In her final year at university, Naira had already gone through the pain of 7 abortions. Her life had been reckless, wild, and full of distractions. Parties, booze, and men were her regular company. Yet, when she found herself pregnant for the 8th time, she didn't expect it to be any different. She took the pills, she tried traditional concoctions, and even visited backdoor clinics hoping for the pregnancy to end, but it refused to go down. As her belly grew, so did her fear. She thought to herself, "This is the last one." Yet, as she walked to the hospital that day, sweating in the heat and feeling her breath short, she couldn't shake the terror building inside her. Sweat poured from her brow, and she felt the panic rise in her chest. The nurses rolled her into the delivery room, and doctors began to gather. The lights were so bright they blinded her, and the room began to spin. "Push!" the doctor ordered. Naira gritted her teeth and pushed. The first baby came out. Then the second, the third, the fourth. The room was chaotic with nurses moving quickly, the doctor shouting orders. "Another one," he called. A 5th baby, then a 6th. Naira blinked, shocked, confused. The doctor barely had time to speak. "Push!" He was frantic now. 7, 8, 9! More babies kept coming. Naira screamed, her voice rising in a high-pitched wail. 10, 11! The doctor shouted, still counting. Naira screamed one last time, her voice like a siren, and the 12th baby arrived. The room filled with cries, small, high-pitched, sharp baby cries. Naira, exhausted, couldn't speak. The doctor wiped his forehead, stunned. "It's 12. You gave birth to 12 children," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Naira's eyes went wide as if she were seeing the world for the first time. "It's a lie," she whispered in disbelief. "How can one person carry 12? But it wasn't a lie. There they were, 12 tiny babies wrapped in white cloth, lying, side by side like loaves of bread. Some were sleeping, some yawning, some crying, boys and girls mixed like corn and beans. Naira's lips trembled, her hands shook. She couldn't move, her heart raced, and her body felt like it had turned to stone. A nurse approached and gently asked, "Madam, who should we call? The father?" Naira just stared at the wall, her mouth opening but no words came out. How could she call a father when she didn't even know who he was? In her 23 years, Naira had lived recklessly. Her life had been a series of parties, booze, and countless men. Some men she couldn't even remember their names. So when the nurse asked who to call, Naira remained silent, her heart empty despite the room being filled with life. The day after, Naira was discharged from the hospital. She sat on her bed, her hair tangled and her eyes tired from the sleepless night. She stared at the 12 babies, her heart a heavy weight in her chest. "I can't do this," she said quietly, her voice dry, like the air in a desert. "I can't keep them." Sandra, her old friend, was standing by the window holding one of the babies. She looked at Naira, her eyes full of concern. "But, Naira, they're your children, all of them. They need you." Naira shook her head, her expression empty. "No, I'll get rid of them, one by one. I need my life back. I want to sleep. I want to go out. I want to breathe," she said bitterly. Sandra's eyes welled with tears as she moved closer. "Please just keep one, even one. You don't know what the future holds." Naira looked at Sandra, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "Gift? Did I ask for a gift?" she scoffed. She glanced back at the babies who lay side by side like fragile dolls. Some of them were yawning, one had its tiny fingers in its mouth, and others were crying softly. Her heart remained cold, her mind distant. "What will I eat with them crying every day? Pampers, milk, how will I survive?" she muttered to herself, more to the air than anyone else. She clenched her fists, her face hardening with resolve. "I'm not cut out for this." Sandra's voice cracked with emotion. Please, Naira, these babies are a blessing from God. You don't know what the future holds. Please, just think about it. Naira's lips trembled, but she turned away from Sandra and stared at the babies once again. Her mind was made up. That night, when the moon was low in the sky and the babies were finally asleep, Naira sat by the window and picked up a pen and a piece of paper. She started writing. The names of the men she had slept with. Some she remembered, some she didn't, some she couldn't even recall their last names. She wrote them all down in the hope that one of them might help her. When she was finished, she folded the paper and tucked it away in her purse. Tomorrow she would start. She would take each baby to the men who were their fathers, one by one, and she would never look back. Her decision was final. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Naira picked up two of the babies, a boy and a girl. She bathed them gently, dressed them in clean matching clothes, and wrapped them in soft shawls. Their tiny hands waved in the air as if they were saying goodbye. Sandra stood in the doorway, her eyes pleading. "Naira, please don't do this," she whispered. But Naira didn't answer. Her heart was set like stone. She carried the babies in a small bag, holding them close to her chest, and walked out without a word. Naira stepped into the busy streets of the town, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. The morning was still cool, but the sun's rays slowly crept over the horizon, casting a soft golden hue over the bustling market. People shouted to each other, cars honked, and the usual hustle and bustle filled the air. But Naira didn't care. Her mind was focused only on one thing: getting the babies to their fathers. She hailed a taxi and told the driver her destination. The ride felt long, the air inside the car stifling. She glanced down at the babies, her heart not softening but hardening, the cold stone of her resolve sinking deeper inside her chest. She didn't want to be a mother. Not now, not ever. She just wanted to be free. After what felt like an eternity, the taxi stopped in front of a tall black gate. Naira paid the driver and stepped out. The house behind the gate was large and imposing, the kind of house that made a statement: wealth, power, and luxury. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and walked to the gate. She knocked 3 times. The door creaked open and a man appeared, tall, dark, and confused. He looked at Naira, his brow furrowed in recognition. "You again? What do you want?" Naira didn't smile. She lifted the babies in her arms, her voice cold. "These are yours," she said flatly, her tone offering no room for argument. The man blinked in disbelief. "Mine? From where? What are you talking about?" Naira took another step forward, her eyes unwavering. "We met that night at the hotel. I got pregnant. These are your twins." The man's face twisted in confusion and skepticism. "Twins. From one night." His voice was low, almost disbelieving. Naira nodded. "Yes. You can deny it, but they look like you. If you doubt me, we can do a DNA test." The man's jaw clenched. He scratched his head, unsure of what to say. Naira's gaze didn't waver. She wasn't giving him any room to back out. For a long time, the man stood there, unmoving. Maybe fear had crept into his heart. Maybe guilt, perhaps shame. In the end, he sighed heavily and stepped aside. Wait, come in," he muttered. "Put them inside." Naira didn't hesitate. She stepped inside the gate, carrying the babies carefully, and placed them gently on the couch in the living room. She stood back, arms crossed, as the man looked down at the twins. His face showed no warmth, only a cold detachment. "What if I can't take care of them?" he asked, his voice small, almost regretful. Naira didn't look back. "That's your problem," she said sharply. "You're their father now." And just like that, Naira turned and walked away. She didn't say goodbye, didn't offer any words of comfort, just walked out of the house. the gate closing behind her with a soft click. 2 babies gone, 10 more to go. The next day, Naira woke up with a sense of numbness. Her heart still felt like stone, but there was no more crying. No more babies in her room. The silence was deafening, but it brought her some kind of peace. She told herself she had done the right thing. After all, she was just making sure these babies were cared for by their fathers, the ones who should be responsible for them. That afternoon, she picked up another baby. This one was a small boy with a round face and sleepy eyes, still swaddled in a white cloth. Naira looked at him, her heart not even twitching. She tied him securely to her back and walked out of her apartment. She knew where she was going next. It was a familiar place. A wealthy businessman who had once shown interest in her. His sleek black car and powerful presence still echoed in her mind. They'd had their night, one night that was now the reason for this child. The thought of it made her stomach churn, but she pushed it aside. She had to do what she had to do. Naira arrived at the office building where the man worked. She walked up to the front, the security guard recognizing her, but she didn't care. She was beyond caring. She had already made her decision. She walked straight through the glass doors into the lobby, where the man's secretary greeted her, with a polite smile, unaware of what was to come. A moment later, the man stepped out. He was impeccably dressed in a sharp suit, his smile radiant at first. "Ah, Naira, it's been a while. What brings you here today?" he asked, his tone oozing confidence. Naira didn't return his smile. Without a word, she untied the baby from her back and handed him to the man. "This is your son," she said coldly. "From that night at the hotel." The man blinked in disbelief. "What? Are you crazy? I don't even remember the details of that night. We barely spoke." Naira's face remained blank, her eyes cold. "Doesn't matter. You are his father. He's your responsibility now." The man took a step back, his eyes darting around nervously. No. I don't want this. I'm married. I can't have a child like this." His voice was rising. Now, growing more agitated, Naira remained calm. "It doesn't matter if you don't want it. You can't just pretend this never happened. I'm not here to argue. I'm leaving the child here with you." She turned her back and began to walk, away, not even giving him a second chance to protest. As she reached the door, she heard him shout behind her, "You can't just leave a child here with me." But Naira didn't turn around. She walked out the door without looking back, without a single word. The baby was his problem now. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't giving up on the babies. She was just making sure they were given the care they deserved, even if it wasn't from her. There was no room for guilt, no room for regret. She had her life to live, and this was her way of freeing herself from the burden. By the time Naira stepped into her apartment that evening, she felt a small, sick sense of relief. 2 babies gone, 10 left. Her heart didn't hurt, but there was a hollow space inside her chest. Still, she would carry on. One by one, she would get rid of them. The idea of having 12 children wasn't part of her plan. She wanted freedom. Freedom from responsibility. Freedom from motherhood. And if that meant walking away from them, then that was what she would do. The days passed in a blur of silence and cold resolve. Naira moved from one man to the next, each door closing behind her like a chapter in a book she no longer wanted to read. Every time she walked away, her heart felt just a little emptier. But that emptiness wasn't something she could name. It was simply the price she paid for the freedom she so desperately craved. By the time she picked up the next baby, a small girl with bright eyes and a calm demeanor, she no longer felt anything. Her mind was numb, her emotions distant, like she was watching herself in a dream. The world around her seemed to move in slow motion, each step she took heavier than the last. But the decision was made. She couldn't go back. The babies would. Go one by one. The next man on her list was someone she had met during a brief affair a few years ago. He was a club bouncer, the type who carried a sense of authority with his broad shoulders and stern face. Naira had never really cared about him. He had simply been another fleeting encounter, one more notch on her bedpost. But now, he was the father of her child. She walked into the small club where he worked. The music was loud, the lights dim, but she barely noticed. She approached him at the door, where he was checking IDs, his face serious and stern. "What do you want, Naira?" he asked, without a hint of surprise. He had seen her around before, but this was different. Naira looked at him, her face impassive. She placed the baby in his arms, her voice low. "This is your daughter, from the night we spent together." The bouncer looked at the baby, his expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice rising. "I don't know this child. I don't even remember you." Naira didn't flinch. She wasn't here for his apologies or his excuses. "She's yours. You don't have to like it, but you have to take responsibility." For a moment, the bouncer just stared at the baby in his arms, his face full of confusion and disbelief. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Take care of her," Naira said, her tone flat. "That's your problem now." Without waiting for a response, Naira turned and walked away. The bouncer's protests echoed behind her, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't afford to care anymore. The next baby she carried to a different man was a lecturer from her university. He had been another brief encounter, a professor who had taken interest in her academic success and, later, in her body. She had never wanted anything more from him, but now she was bringing him his child. The lecture hall was empty when she found him, sitting alone at his desk, papers scattered around him. When he saw her, he stood up quickly, his eyes widening with recognition. "Not you," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Why are you here?" Naira didn't respond. She simply unwrapped the baby from the cloth she had carefully placed around him and handed the tiny form to the professor. "This is your son," she said simply, "from that night." The professor's face turned pale as he took the baby, his hands shaking. No, I don't want this," he stammered. "You don't have to want it," Naira replied coldly. "You're the father. You have no choice." He looked down at the baby, his eyes conflicted. "I can't. I'm married. This isn't supposed to happen." "Too bad," Naira said, her voice indifferent. "I'm not here to argue. You wanted a fling, and now you have a child. Deal with it." And just like the others, Naira turned and walked away. The professor called after her, but she didn't listen. His life, his problem now. The world seemed smaller as Naira moved from one house to another, delivering the children she had carried for months. The once comforting walls of her apartment now felt suffocating, like a cage that she had built herself. But she wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. She had made a deal with herself. These babies would be taken from her, and she would walk away without a single regret. As the week dragged on, Naira's life felt like a routine she couldn't escape. She would wake up in the morning, pick up a new baby, and carry them to yet another man who had been part of her chaotic life. Each door she knocked on, each man she confronted, only confirmed the decision she had made. There was no going back. She had to keep moving forward, no matter how empty she felt inside. The next day, Naira carried a tiny girl, her hair soft and curly like cotton candy, to a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It was where she had once had a brief fling with a hotel manager who had given her a ride home one night. He had been kind, but their connection was fleeting, and it had never occurred to her that their encounter would result in a child. Yet, here she was, holding his daughter in her arms. The apartment was modest, the walls bare except for a few pictures of family vacations and a small television in the corner. When the manager opened the door, He looked surprised, but didn't seem shocked. He had always been a man of few words, a quiet type. "What are you doing here, Naira?" he asked, his tone neutral but confused. Naira didn't waste time. She placed the baby in his arms, her voice steady but cold. "This is your daughter, from the night we spent together." The man blinked at the child, his face frozen in disbelief. "My daughter? You've got to be joking. This can't be mine." Naira didn't flinch at his denial. "It is," she replied. "I'm not here to argue. You don't have to believe it, but she's yours now." The manager stared at the baby, his eyes growing soft for the first time. "I didn't know," he said, almost to himself. "I didn't know you were carrying my child." He looked back up at Naira, a hint of regret in his eyes. "Doesn't matter now," Naira said sharply. "You're the father. You need to take responsibility." Without another word, she turned and walked out the door. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to look back. She had already made her choices, and no matter how much the world tried to push her to care, Naira refused. The next man on her list was a well-known politician in town. She had met him at a fundraising event months ago, and their interaction had been brief but memorable. He had an air of authority about him, and his charm was undeniable. At the time, she had been intrigued, but as time passed, she found herself pregnant and alone. Naira arrived at his mansion just as the sun began to set. The large gates opened before she even had a chance to knock. She stepped inside, her heart barely fluttering with any emotion. The politician was waiting in the foyer, dressed in a dark suit that matched his serious expression. "What is it now, Naira?" he asked, his voice stern but controlled. Naira looked him straight in the eye and walked up to him, placing the baby in his arms. "This is your son, from the night we spent together." The politician looked at the baby, his lips curling into a frown. "This isn't possible. I don't have a child with you." "You do now," Naira said, her voice unwavering. "I'm not here for your excuses. You don't have a choice in this. You're his father. Take care of him." He didn't say a word. Instead, he looked down at the baby, a mixture of confusion and frustration crossing his face. He shifted, uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to respond. "I don't have time for this," he muttered, trying to hand the baby back to Naira. "This isn't my problem." But Naira refused to take the baby back. She stood her ground. "It's too late for that," she said coldly. "He's your responsibility now. I'm done." With that, she turned on her heels and walked out of the mansion, the door slamming shut behind her. Another baby gone. Another man left to face the consequences of his actions. Naira's steps were quick and firm as she left the mansion, her heart still a heavy stone inside her chest. She told herself she had made the right decision. She had given each of these men their responsibility, their burden. But deep down, she knew the truth. She couldn't outrun the weight of her choices forever. Naira's life had become a blur of endless days and nights, moving through the motions like a ghost, carrying her past with each baby she left behind. She told herself it was the right thing to do, that she was freeing herself from the chains of motherhood, but deep down, something inside her was slowly cracking. She woke up the next morning, just like every other, with the empty silence of her apartment greeting her. The babies were gone, the men had taken responsibility, and Naira was left to reclaim her life. But even the emptiness felt heavy, like it was suffocating her. Today, it was a young man she had met once at a party. He was a hotel receptionist, always smiling and always polite. His charm was the kind that drew people in without them realizing it, and Naira had given into it once. But that night had resulted in another child, another life tied to hers in ways she wasn't ready to face. She dressed herself in her usual clothes, a pair of faded jeans and a plain t-shirt, nothing that screamed attention. Her heart was colder, now as if she had built up walls to shield herself from the storm inside. She walked through the streets, the baby wrapped in her arms, its tiny face scrunching up in its sleep. When she reached the hotel, the receptionist was on shift. He didn't notice her right away. His attention focused on the customers in the lobby. Naira stepped up to the counter, placing the baby on the desk in front of him. The receptionist's face immediately changed when he saw her. His eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Naira, what are you doing here?" he asked, clearly unsettled by her sudden appearance. Naira didn't answer him directly. She simply placed the baby in front of him and spoke quietly. "This is your son, from the night we spent together." The receptionist's face drained of color as he looked down at the baby. "My son? This can't be real." "It's real," Naira replied flatly. "You're his father. You need to take care of him now. That's your responsibility, not mine." He looked at the baby, and for a moment there was silence between them. His mouth opened and closed as though he didn't know what to say. Finally, he took the baby awkwardly into his arms, his hands trembling. "But I'm not ready for this," he muttered. "Neither was I," Naira shot back, her tone sharp. "But you don't have a choice now. You are his father, and I'm not going to be his mother." Without waiting for his response, Naira turned and walked out of the hotel. Another man, another child. She had already given him the gift of responsibility. The baby was his now, and she was done. The days blurred together, and with each passing day, Naira could feel herself drifting farther from the woman she used to be. She wasn't sure who she was anymore. The choices she had made, the babies, she had given away. Each decision had chipped away at her soul, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. But she kept moving forward. Every step, every door she knocked on, every baby she handed over to a man who had never wanted them, these were the only things she could focus on. She could ignore the voice inside that whispered regrets. She could shut down the part of her that felt guilt. There was no turning back now, but no matter how much she pushed it all aside, one question lingered in the back of her mind. Would she ever be able to forgive herself? As the days continued to slip away, Naira became more and more disconnected from everything around her. The city felt like a foreign place, the people moving around her like figures in a painting that held no meaning. She would wake up, pick up another baby, and take them to yet another man. But each time she left, it felt like a small piece of her was being torn away, and the emptiness inside her heart grew a little larger. She hadn't spoken to Sandra in days. Sandra had begged her to keep at least one child, to show some love, some compassion. But Naira had turned a deaf ear. She couldn't afford to feel. She couldn't afford to care. The babies weren't hers anymore. They belonged to the men who had fathered them, and they would take responsibility, just like they should have all along. The next man was a hotel lobby worker. Naira remembered him vaguely. He was a smooth talker, one of those men who could charm the world but never truly care about anyone. They had shared a night together once, a fleeting moment of passion, but she hadn't expected anything to come from it. And now, here she was, standing in front of him, holding his child. A small girl with soft black hair and wide eyes that looked up at her in confusion. Naira found him working the late shift. The hotel lobby was quiet, the lights dim, and there was a sense of calm in the air, but Naira didn't feel calm. She felt like a machine, running through the same process day after day. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable, and gently placed the baby in the man's arms. "This is your daughter," she said, her voice steady but distant, "from that night we spent together." The man froze. His eyes widened in disbelief, and he took a step back. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion. "How is this possible?" Naira's face remained emotionless. You don't have to believe it, but she's yours. You are her father." He looked down at the baby, his eyes shifting from shock to something that might have been guilt. "I didn't even know," he whispered, shaking his head. "I didn't know." "Doesn't matter now," Naira replied coldly. "You're her father. You need to take responsibility. I'm done." The man stood there, holding the baby awkwardly, in his arms, unsure of what to do. "I don't know how to do this," he muttered. "Figure it out," Naira snapped, turning away. "It's not my problem anymore." She walked out of the hotel lobby without a second glance, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. The weight in her chest didn't ease, but at least the baby was no longer her responsibility. She had given the man the chance to step up, to face the consequences of his actions. But it didn't matter to her anymore. She couldn't care about what happened to them. She had to keep moving. By now, she had handed over so many babies that the faces of each one were starting to blur in her mind. She didn't remember their names, their cries, or the feeling of their tiny bodies in her arms. It was all a blur, and the numbness inside. Her had spread like a poison. Her friends, her family, everyone she once knew had drifted away. They didn't understand. They couldn't. But that was fine with her. Naira didn't need them anymore. She didn't need anyone. The only thing left for her now was freedom. The weight of the days had begun to sink into Naira's bones. She had been so numb for so long, shutting down every part of herself that could feel, that she almost forgot what it was like to be human. The guilt, the regret, the raw emotions she had suppressed, they all faded into a dull ache that no longer registered. But they were there, lingering in the background, waiting to break through when she least expected it. Naira had one more baby to give away. The last one. This child, a small boy with wide eyes and a soft brown tuft of hair, was hers, but not hers. She had been carrying him in her arms for the past few days, watching him sleep, feeling his warmth. He was a reminder of everything she had been, everything she had lost. But now, he had to go, just like the others. It was the only way. She didn't want to take him to another stranger, another face in the crowd. But it had to be done. She had promised herself that the cycle would end, that she would leave no loose ends, no lingering connections. Today, she went to the house of an older man she had known in passing. He had been a wealthy man, someone who could provide for the baby. She had met him at an upscale restaurant once, and though they hadn't shared much more than a few casual conversations, he had always looked at her with interest. He had always seemed like the type who could handle the responsibility. The man's mansion was grand and towering, with tall, imposing gates that seemed to stretch into the sky. When Naira arrived, the house stood still, silent, like the fortress. It was. She knocked on the door, her heart beating in her chest, but not out of fear. It was something else. A kind of resignation. The man opened the door, looking at her with the same calm expression he always wore. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, recognition, mixed with something else that Naira couldn't place. "You again?" he asked, his voice steady. Naira didn't waste time. She stepped forward, holding the baby in her arms. The boy looked up at the man, his eyes wide with innocence. "This is your son," she said, her voice flat. "From that night." The man's face shifted. It was subtle, but Naira noticed. He looked down at the baby, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he didn't speak. The air between them thickened, and Naira felt something stir inside her, a flicker of something she had long forgotten. "I didn't expect this," he said, his voice softer now, almost reluctant. "You don't have to expect anything," Naira replied. "You don't get to choose. He's yours now. Take him." The man hesitated. His eyes lingered on the child for a moment, and Naira could see the conflict in his gaze. But then he nodded, almost imperceptibly, and reached out to take the baby into his arms. He was the last. Naira had carried this burden alone for too long, and now it was time to let it go. She had delivered each of her children to their fathers, and now she was finally free. "I won't forget him," the man said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Naira nodded, her heart feeling like a stone in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She didn't care anymore. She had made her choice. She had made all of her choices. Without another word, Naira turned and walked out of the house. She could hear the man's voice calling out behind her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. This chapter was over and there was nothing left for her in this life. She stepped into the street, the world around her full of noise and movement, but all she could hear was the silence in her own soul. The emptiness that she had fought so hard to bury was finally rising, and she wasn't sure how to deal with it. But for the first time in a long while, Naira allowed herself to feel. It wasn't the end she had hoped for, but it was the end she had created. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling. Naira had delivered every last child, one by one, and the weight that had been pressing on her for so long had finally lifted. But with the lifting of that burden came a quiet, hollow ache in her chest. She hadn't expected the emptiness to feel so suffocating. She hadn't expected the silence to ring so loud in her ears. Her phone had stopped ringing, her friends had stopped calling, no one reached out to check on her, and she didn't blame them. They had all moved on with their lives, started families, gotten married, and left her behind in a life of reckless decisions. Naira sat alone in her small apartment, looking out the window at the world that continued on without her. The city outside seemed so full of life, but all she could see was her own reflection in the glass. She had done what she thought she had to do, but now she couldn't escape the crushing reality that she had given up a part of herself she could never get back. The phone on the table beside her rang, its sharp sound cutting through the quiet. She picked it up absently, not expecting anything. When she saw the number, her heart skipped a beat. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello?" Her voice was shaky, unsure. "Is this Naira?" A deep voice asked from the other end. It was a man, but she couldn't place him. "Yes, who's this?" she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "You probably don't remember me," the man said, "but I'm your former lecturer. I taught you at the university, a long time ago." Naira's heart raced as memories flooded back. She had taken his course in her first year, a man with a stern yet kind demeanor, someone who had always shown interest in her progress but never overstepped his bounds. "Of course I remember. You," Naira said quietly. "What's this about?" I don't have much time," the lecturer's voice cracked slightly. "I'm in the hospital, but before I go, I need to tell you something. Something you need to hear." Naira sat up straighter, a cold chill running through her. "What is it?" "It's about one of your children," he said, his voice low. "The one you left with me." Naira's breath hitched. The child? She hadn't thought about them in months. But now, here it was. The one she had given away. The one she had almost forgotten. "I know you left her with me a long time ago," the lecturer continued. "But I've been taking care of her all these years. Her name is Tenny. She's grown up well. She's in school now, and I think it's time for you to know the truth." Naira felt her heart stop. "Tenny?" she whispered. "My daughter?" "Yes," the lecturer said softly. "She's in school now. She's a beautiful girl, but she doesn't know who you are. She doesn't even know you're her mother. I thought, before I leave this world, she deserves to know the truth. She deserves to know you." The words hit Naira like a punch to the gut. she felt the blood drain from her face. For all her running, for all the years of detaching herself from everything she had once known, here was the truth she had been avoiding. The one thing she couldn't outrun. A part of her wanted to run again, to block it out, to let it go. But there was something else, a flicker of hope. Maybe this was her chance. Maybe this was the moment she could fix everything. She hadn't lost all of herself. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. Naira stood up, her hands shaking. "Where is she?" she asked, her voice soft. "Where is Tenny?" "She's in a small town nearby," the lecturer replied. "I'm not sure how much longer I have, but if you want to meet her, you have to come now. I don't think I'll make it much longer, but she deserves to know." Without another word, Naira hung up the phone. Her heart was racing, her mind spinning. It felt like everything she had done had led her to this point. She had run from her past, from her choices, but now the past had come rushing back. She grabbed her bag and stepped out the door, heading towards a future she wasn't sure she was ready for. But this time, she wasn't running. She was going to face it. She was going to find Tenny. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a part of herself she had lost a long time ago.